Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time let's do something a little different, a little more fun. Let's do this what if question from Yvonne Swords, who asked, "Hey Thor, what if Order 66 didn't work? What if it all backfired for Palpatine and the Jedi was able to expose him to the Senate and the Republic never failed? Interested to hear where you would take that story." Okay, so what if Order 66 didn't work? Which, for this video, I'm going to assume means that it was still issued by Palpatine, and for whatever reason, the clones didn't follow it, or the chips didn't activate, or something along those lines happens, and that virtually everything else up to that point is still the same. And what's right away going to be interesting about this scenario, if this is when the change occurs, when the order is given, well, a lot of really interesting things have already happened, most importantly being the failed arrest attempt by Windu and company, of Palpatine of course, as well as Anakin's fall to the dark side, because we obviously know it's very shortly after those things happen, after Anakin has pledged himself to Palpatine's teachings, and even left to begin his attack on the Jedi Temple, that Palpatine gives the order that again, for some reason, will not work. And I think what we first have to decide here is, why does it not work? Why do the clones not follow it? And I can see there being likely two possibilities here. One, the chips simply don't work. There is something wrong with them on the whole, always has been, though you'd really think they would have tested them first. Or perhaps there's some other way they've all been secretly deactivated. Maybe some way, somehow, someone followed up on what happened to Fives, discovered the truth of the chips, and was able to shut them all down. Just don't ask me how exactly they do that, though I did do something like that in a fanfiction story once. The other most likely or plausible possibility is that the clones are able to resist the chip's programming, that after everything that some of them have gone through, especially with the Jedi serving under them, that they would be able to resist and question the order and ultimately not follow it. And I say some of them because I'd imagine those with minimal or no experience with the Jedi, the younger clones, mainly the shinies, they'd probably still be affected by it. Which would then lead to a very heart-wrenching scenario where, again, the older clones would mainly be able to resist the chip, to resist Order 66 and not attack the Jedi that they'd been serving under loyally for potentially years at that point. But the younger ones wouldn't have that same sort of connection to the Jedi, or wouldn't have developed that bit of independence that I think the older clones learned from the Jedi, which is probably what would help them resist, of course. And we even see someone like Rex is able to kinda a little bit fight it off because of that very thing, I'd argue. And so the older clones would resist while the younger ones wouldn't, and they would still attack the Jedi, and the older clones would, I think, protect their Jedi generals. I think they'd be forced to fight the younger clones, especially if they don't know what exactly has happened. If it just seemed like for some reason out of the blue their brothers had gone crazy and started to shoot at the Jedi for no apparent reason, which leads to another really curious or interesting question we'd have to address if we go with the resist the chip. That being, when they do resist it, do they understand what they're resisting? Do they, on some level, understand something was trying to compel them to kill the Jedi and they fought it off? And thus would be able to likely understand why some clones then were trying to kill the Jedi, because they hadn't been able to fight it off. However, what's interesting is, even if it simply is a matter of the chips not working, that they all malfunction somehow, or something else happens to stop literally all of them, and no clone is affected by the issuing of Order 66, you would likely still have a similar situation or scenario eventually coming to pass. You'd still have some clones who wouldn't just side with the Jedi because, well, again, they didn't know them or hadn't been fighting with them, and would essentially side with Palpatine and the Senate. I think they would revert to the original sort of programming that we hear about in Attack of the Clones, where they follow any order without question, and in that case, I think they default to the highest authority, that of course being Palpatine, and not the Jedi in the upcoming new Clone Wars, or Clone versus Clone Wars, let's call them. In other words, I think either way we go with this when it comes to why the clones don't follow Order 66, why it doesn't work, we're ultimately going to end up with a new sort of, again, Clone Wars, or Clone versus Clones. I think you'd have some clones, a lot of clones probably, the veteran or more experienced ones. They would be siding with the Jedi, who would no doubt do everything they could to expose Palpatine as the traitor he is. Keeping in mind again, the Windu attack on Palpatine has still happened, and he has still been left scarred and deformed. He can still sell that same story to the Senate before proclaiming himself emperor, which he'd likely do again and would probably get the same reaction from the Senate. He'd probably still get thunderous applause from most of them. Though in this scenario, there would still be plenty of Jedi out there and in command of clone armies. I think there would be a lot of fear within the Senate, and perhaps, even though, like I said, he or they, the Senate, would still have some clones loyal to them, he may immediately try to form the new Imperial Army and Navy. He might accelerate the plans to do away with the clones and to go with recruits instead. Another interesting facet or variable we would have to consider is Anakin, or should I say Darth Vader. Again, he has already fallen. We first have to ask, what does the 501st, minus Rex, who is with Ahsoka, what do they do when he tries to lead them in an attack on the Jedi Temple? Do they believe him that the other Jedi have turned or betrayed the Republic? Or do they maybe realize something is wrong with him? Going back to the incident with Pong Krell on Umbara, where they saw that, yeah, a Jedi can kind of go bad. Would they think he's gone bad, or would they again believe him about the other Jedi? That is a really fun question. Also, with Order 66 not happening, or at least not happening at all like it once did, it may still kind of happen if some clones resist the chips and others don't. But with Cody and the 212th likely not turning on Obi-Wan, his destiny changes too. He never has to flee Utapau like he does in the film, and thus doesn't meet up with Yoda and Bail Organa like he once did, or at least not in the same way anymore. I mean, in this scenario, yes, the Jedi would likely or no doubt all kind of come together and rally their forces together. Like I said, I think a new war or clone war would happen, yet they, Obi-Wan and Yoda, don't really have a reason to go back to Coruscant, or don't get taken there by Bail Organa like we see in the films, and thus don't make it back to the Jedi Temple where they learn that Anakin has become Darth Vader. He is with Palpatine now. Unless Yoda has already felt it, which I think even in Revenge of the Sith it's heavily implied he does know exactly what happened when he says that line about how if Obi-Wan goes into the recordings, only pain will he find. I think Yoda sensed Anakin's fall, and I think Yoda would sense or feel his fall here too, just like he sensed when Anakin slaughtered the Tuskens on Tatooine during the events of Attack of the Clones. He's still going to know Anakin has gone dark side, but maybe he doesn't right away tell Obi-Wan, or they're not going to know how to find Anakin unless they do go back to Coruscant to talk with Padme. But if they don't do that, if Obi-Wan never goes to Padme, like again we see in the film, it is going to be a huge, huge change. Because that means the Battle of the Heroes on Mustafar never happens, and Anakin or Vader is never condemned to the suit, and Padme isn't killed because it was Obi-Wan, after he told her the truth about Anakin's fall, that sort of spurred her on to follow him, to follow Anakin to Mustafar so that he could follow her, where she of course ultimately ends up dying, and the twins end up with Obi-Wan and Yoda, or in the end with the Lars family and the Organa family. But that's not going to happen anymore. Now the twins end up with Anakin and Padme, unless she tries to take them and run at some point, which she might when she eventually realizes or maybe comes to accept what Anakin has become. Either way, it also means that not in the suit Darth Vader would be leading the, let's call them a loyalist clone army, those who had stayed with the Republic and are not aiding the renegade Jedi clone army, which is rather interesting to have him, again not in the suit, in command of the clone army, or the loyalist ones. As is again the fact that there's still a lot of Jedi left out there alive and well, able to lead that renegade clone army, who, like I was saying before, would no doubt try to expose Palpatine. They would do everything they can to show the Senate what had really happened or what was really going on, and with the help of some of the Senate members who no doubt believe the Jedi, I think they would have a pretty strong case to make. And so we finally get to the question of how does it all shake out? Well, you're free to give your take in the comments below, of course. But I think the veteran renegade Jedi clone army has a huge edge over Palpatine's loyalist, rookie, shiny clone army, even if it is led by Darth Vader and perhaps has the 501st as well. But he of course can't be everywhere, while the Jedi's numbers would still be great enough to be pretty much everywhere they would need to be on any battlefield. Plus, many of them would be quite powerful Jedi. We would still have Yoda and Obi-Wan and Plo Koon and others that, well, aren't going to be going into hiding, they are going to be fighting. I think eventually, in pretty short order, the Jedi and Renegade Clone Army essentially would lay siege to Coruscant, and Palpatine and Vader would be defeated, either killed or captured by the Jedi, the powerful ones that are left. And we could go into a lot of fun possibilities as to exactly how this would all happen. And though the Jedi do then take control of the Senate, kind of like Windu was suggesting they might, they do all they can to quickly transfer power back to the Senate. I could even see someone like Bail Organa or Padme or Mon Mothma being made a sort of emergency chancellor right away to show good faith, or to show that the Jedi really don't want the power, they're just doing what they must. Finally, after all this, a massive investigation would be launched as to what really happened during the Clone Wars, or how it all played out, or how it all began. And once concluded, there's a very public trial where all of Palpatine's crimes are laid out, and assuming he hasn't been killed or wasn't killed in the siege of Coruscant, he is then imprisoned for the rest of his life, if not executed for treason, which is likely what also happens to Anakin. Though a fun alternate scenario, or what I would like to go with, is that Anakin is never captured. He escapes during the siege of Coruscant, and he takes one or both of his kids with them and kind of disappears out into the unknown parts of space, only to return again one day. But either way, one way or the other, I do think if Order 66 again doesn't work, another conflict arises, a second sort of clone war erupts, and this time Palpatine loses and the Republic is ultimately saved by the Jedi, who will have their good name restored and be vindicated and once again become the protectors of peace and justice in the Republic. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me how you think this would all play out, or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video, including asking about another what-if scenario. This was fun to do, and hopefully you all enjoyed it as well. Anyway, to ask a question, all you gotta do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor," and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.